Okay, Chris, we need to know a little bit more about how a long time gone nearly wasn't even there, let alone gone.
Yeah, I was in Australia visiting a friend, and I got a phone call saying, from the publishers, oh, we've gone bust, which wasn't very good news. So as I said, I ended up meeting them on the M6 and got all the stuff back. And then Timeform got to hear about it, Jeff Greeton, and invited me up there and liked what he saw, and that they agreed to publish it. He said, have you thought about the cover yet? I said, no, not really. I said, oh, by the way, there's a few old race cards I'd like to include just to pad out the blank pages. And suddenly we looked at each other and thought, yeah, race card covers, that's not a bad idea. And so the next thing you know, Timeformer designed it with all these old race courses from Manchester and Buckfastleigh and Lanark and Hurst Park. And that's how we got the cover.
Now, when you did this book and when you researched it in 1996, I don't think there was even an internet, was there?
There was no internet, and that's the thing. I wonder how I did it because it was all about visiting or calling county record offices or local libraries or national or provincial newspapers to get the photos. So, when I look at it now, I think, well, yeah, I mean, there have been other books written on that, some of them um, more detailed and perhaps better, but when I think about it, that wasn't a bad effort.
No, and that's, I mean, everybody looks at that as the work now, don't they?
It seems to be the seminal thing, even
Yeah.
though I've had about 7 books published since then.
Now, and no offence meant by this at all, the
No.
next question,
Mm.
but you've been happy to write books on what would appear to only potentially attract niche audiences. So Chandler's Leap and 300 Years at Pitchcroft being two that I saw. I'm sure they're very interesting, but they are specific for fairly unique sort of places. Is it your well? Would you agree with that? First of all, is it does your own personal interest have to be piqued before you embark on a project?
Oh, yes, it does. The niche part, Mary summed it up very well. She said, find a niche and fill it. With the Pitchcroft book and Chandler's Leap, I was invited to write those by Worcester and Warwick. Warwick, Andre Klein, loved A Long Time Gone. It's his favourite book. He was the manager there then and had taken it all around the world, so it didn't take an awful lot of persuading. But yeah, the history of those courses being local as well, they were easy to visit and source the information from libraries and such. So yeah, the interest does have to be piqued before I want to write something. Yeah,
And when going back to a long time gone, did you actually sort of go and try and find where these places were?
yeah, for a good number of them, not every one, because some of them were, you know, just impossible to find. But there were, some wonderful days at Alexandra Park and Y and Lewis and some of the more recent ones. I went pointer pointing at Buckfastleigh and at Lincoln. Went to the last day's racing at Lanark. So yeah, did do quite a few of those.
See the Buckfastleigh, the stand's nearly falling into the field now. It's
Yeah, I know. I went and saw it and stood by it, and it was a Marie Celeste, as if to say we don't want you there anymore.
Now I'm interested. I must have behind the title of your book on the Grand National, go down to the beaten. Now what does that mean?
It's a line from a John Masefield poem. Go down to the beaten who have come to the truth that is deeper than sorrow and stronger than youth. And that's what I had to do. I had to go down to the beaten, the people who didn't win the race, who'd failed to win it. But the interesting thing there was that the difference between what they thought of as success and failure. A jockey who'd been second in the race 3 times, it was a terrific thrill, and another guy who'd finished second, beaten half a length, it was the worst moment of his life. And I think that, how can I say it, it defined what is perhaps success and failure. But also that book, and it's my favourite book, um, when these people die, when the jockeys die, their stories die with them. You need to have someone to record that. There are 39 stories that don't get told in the Grand National. The winners does, the others don't. And by process of elimination, there's got to be something like some great stories. Yes, I had the John Frankhams, Peter Scudamores in the book, but I had the Keith Barnfields and the Peter Collises, people that no one would remember or hardly anyone remember. But they had a story to tell about their day or days riding in the most famous race in Britain. And you've got to record those. You just have to have them.
And did you go back through the form book and look for the most unlucky, or was it just a case of who was available and who'd ridden in the race?
With the 1940s, of course, it was a very limited field as to who was left. But I was very lucky in getting people like Bill Lay and Bill Denson and Glenn Kelly, a lot of whom just aren't around. They'd all died by the time that the book came out, pretty much. So it was getting them, and Glenn Kelly, how he's absolutely convinced that he won the Cheltenham Gold Cup on Green Oak, where the result went to Martin Maloney. Just great stories.
Yeah, because people only remember the victors.
Of course, that's it.
Now, is there a name for someone that has visited every racecourse in Great Britain? Is there like a club name or something like that? Because you were a member of that club.
It's the club's growing all the time. Is there a collective now? No, I don't know. A risk, maybe.
So why did you embark on that particular challenge?
It was. I didn't ever set myself a time frame for doing it, but I always knew I'd do it eventually. So it was just something that I just wanted to do. I think I finished the set at Fakenham in 1985, but it was never a desperate challenge. It was something I knew I would do in time.
Was it sort of you realised that you'd done so many and thought I might as well finish the rest?
Yeah, well, not even that. It's just I was always going to do it. I will do it as and when. When I was working, I'd got a job to do, so I was fitting it in there and then. So yeah, it didn't absorb me totally. I wasn't sort of saying I've got to get this done as soon as I can.
And did you? I assume you did it when racing was on.
Oh yeah, had to be when racing was on.
Were there any particular courses that sort of struck you, sort of specially?
They're all so different. There were, places like Sandown, major tracks, right down to Market Raisin. But I always find you get a very big welcome at the Yorkshire courses. So I love going there. Ripon is a particular favourite. It's a wonderful little course. They do a great job there. It looks immaculate.
And amazingly, you've nearly done all the Irish ones as well.
All bar 3, Limerick, Listowel and Thurles. And the first 2 of those I'm going to be doing in June this year when I go on a trip for a couple of weeks with an old school friend of mine who now lives in Australia. And so that'll just leave Thurles, which of course isn't the easiest, as they only race on alternate Thursdays in midwinter. But eventually that will get done.
And are there any of those that have been a long time gone that you've been to and they're no longer there? Because there's a few Irish tracks disappeared.
I went racing at Tralee before they closed that down, but that's probably the only one that I can think of. I'd like to have found Mullingar and Tuam, but never got round to that.
And you also continued, I'm assuming you're not going to try and embark on every race course, but you've done several around the world.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. Been very lucky indeed. Hong Kong, Macau, several in Australia, South Africa, and America, and of course, being married to Mary, who's from Boston. I've done a lot over in the States and most of the major European countries.
Any particular ones that stick out that were sort of unusual compared to what we're used to?
Mary was once asked which one impressed her most, and I think she quite rightly said sort of Sha-Tin, the Hong Kong courses. So yes, that. I've been to Velká Pardubice in the Czech Republic, but they've got a sort of smaller version at a place called Wrocław in Poland, which is in the west side of Poland. The whole place actually is quite interesting. It's a university town, Wrocław, and I think used to be part of East Germany until it was de-Germanised after the war. But they've got a little mini taxis fence in front of the stands there, and tremendous little atmosphere. 1908 grandstand and that. Wrocław, love to go there. And Murano, which is probably the most beautiful racecourse I've ever been to, surrounded in the valley by the Dolomites. Just magic, really good.
And you were, or still, are you still involved in BBC Radio?
No, no, not for several years now. I went on holiday once and heard someone that I put in for the job, and I thought he's better than I am, so we ended up doing it.
And did that get you? Were you reporting from the races?
No, no, I'll be in the studio there. Yeah, there were, a couple of events spring to mind actually. One was the Void 1993 Grand National, when I'd just gone there to preview it and maybe give a short synopsis at the end of the race. And of course, with all the problems that happened, the full start to the whole lot, they said, stick around, don't go. And I think it was about the first time that the 5 o'clock sports report contained on BBC Radio WM more questions about the Grand National with people ringing in than to talk about the matches that had happened that afternoon. And I remember off the top of my head, I just suddenly thought, they were saying, why can't you use stall starts for the Grand National? And it just came to me, and I said, because it would be like a running jump for a cross channel swim. And that I got a lovely letter from them saying, thanks for getting us out of the trouble. But I think the most embarrassing one was 1992, and they wheeled me in on a Wednesday afternoon to preview the Derby, won by Dr. Devious. And I walked in there to the studios, and they said, "Oh, go in there in a couple of minutes. He's interviewing this lady, Maria Whittaker." Uh, who's that? I said, the Sun page 3 girl from 1991 or something like that. So I went in and she was plugging a book and everything, and she was very nice. And anyway, then he turned to me and got a preview at the Derby, and I gave him the usual blurb. And Maria said, I'd been given a tip for a horse quite named Dr. Devious, and I like the name. And to which I replied, well, because he's only just come back from a very tough assignment in the Kentucky Derby, and it might be tough taking a bit more out of him. So anyway, Maria Whittaker is sort of painting her nails and doing whatever, and we're watching the race on TV, and as they come round Tattenham Corner, mine's clearly beat. And about 3 furlongs out, I said, Dr. Devious is going well, to which he starts to take an interest, and of course Dr. Devious runs away and wins. And so at the end of the day, then I've got to sort of explain why it is that the Racing Tipsters hot tip finished 7th or 8th, whereas Maria Whittaker, who didn't know the difference between Derby Day and Pancake Day, had just got and tipped the winner. So that was an interesting experience.
Tell us about the West Midlands Racing Club.
Yeah, I formed that in 1985 with a committee essentially to stimulate interest. So we would have guest nights with famous jockeys and owners, trainers, members of the media and officials. We'd do stable visits to local yards. We'd arrange day trips to racecourses, week-long holidays in Ireland. We'd do competitions and monthly newsletter, everything we could to stimulate interest. And we had some fabulous guests in the time, from Frankie Dettori and Peter O'Sullivan, Julian Wilson. So, yeah, we ran that for about 30 years altogether.
And is it not going anymore?
No, we finished it around 2016. The membership was declining, and we weren't getting any new blood coming in. The committee was sort of disintegrating due to various moving away or ill health or whatever. And it just came to the stage where, as McCoy said when he retired, I'd rather that we finished while people saying, why are you finished, rather than when are you going to finish. But we had 30 fantastic years with it and had wonderful guests. A Grand National preview, which wasn't a preview actually, it was a reunion, and we'd get these jockeys from the 60s and 70s and 80s back, hadn't seen each other for 30 years, and they absolutely loved it. We'd do replays of the races they won, and it was my way in that sense of giving something back to those guys who've given so much to me.